afternoon, Dayton. It is great to be here. I will tell you that from my own perspective, as somebody who has not had the privilege of coming to Dayton before, I believe in my heart that Dayton is perhaps the most hospitable and warm city that I have ever seen. I hope you'll agree with me.
Yes.
Before I introduce our distinguished guests, I also would like to extend my gratitude not only to all the staff and all the teams that have made this happen, but especially to the University of Dayton. This is a house of learning. We are learning, and just as we learn from each other, we always learn from our faculty and our students, and it's great to have some of them here in the audience. 30 years ago, almost to the day, or maybe not quite to the day, but about 30 years ago, the world was focused right here on Dayton, Ohio. It was a moment where, as we were just discussing in the back room, the truly most tragic drama playing out around the world was happening in the Western Balkans as the world was riveted and saddened by the tragedy playing out in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It was no accident that that effort culminated in a push at Wright-Patman Air Force Base, cut off from the media with a focus on real diplomacy with 800 staff and diplomats and folks, all focused on one thing, which is how to be practical, but also idealistic, how to avoid more bloodshed. And today we look back and think about what that legacy means. And when people in the Western Balkans say the Dayton, they mean that agreement. They mean diplomacy. They mean what happens when we talk to each other and try to understand each other rather than fighting. But today, 30 years later, the world can look at the Western Balkans and understand that while there has been some progress, some movement forward, there is also cause for concern as some of the same festering challenges that are playing out around the world and that were part of what was happening in the 1990s continue to be a challenge. We look for bright lights that are inspiring and that can give us hope, but can also be honest about the challenges. And to engage on these questions against the backdrop of this historic NATO summit, I'm very pleased to introduce the President of the Republic of Kosovo, Vjosa Osmani, who is a lawyer trained in the arts of the law at the University of Pittsburgh with an LLM as well as an SJD, a doctorate, who has experience in policy and in the practice of law, and who served as Chief of Staff to the President of Kosovo before entering her own career in politics. We're very honored to have her. She has garnered a reputation as being not only a pragmatist and someone who follows foreign affairs with the responsibility on her shoulders, but a deeply committed supporter of the rule of law. Welcome, President. It is also my great pleasure to introduce a very seasoned diplomat and a friend of my organization, the Carnegie Endowment. I should say, my name is Tino Cuellar. I'm president of the Carnegie Endowment based in Washington. And I'm referring to Ambassador Karen Pierce of the United Kingdom. She was the permanent representative of the United Kingdom in the United Nations. Previous to that, had many senior diplomatic postings, including in Washington, but also in the Balkans, focused on helping to heal what was happening there. And now is serving in the crucial role of special envoy for the Western Balkans, thinking hard about these questions of how democracy, development, security can be achieved in that crucial region, against the backdrop, of course, again, of questions about the scope of NATO and the enlargement of it, as well as of the European Union. Welcome, Ambassador. Glad to have you here. I'm going to start with a few questions for our distinguished guests, and we'll have a conversation among three of us. Maybe we'll even find some things to disagree about. I doubt it. We'll see. But then we do have some time for questions from the audience. So after we've had a good chat, I will invite some questions from the audience, and we'll see where the conversation goes. So let me start with you, Madam President. Today, the world comes together in different settings, and here much of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly is all happening. And as they have their conversations about security and about peace, what do you think is the most important thing that NATO as an organization can do to support what is happening in Kosovo, and how would you assess the current situation in your country?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's such a great pleasure to be here in Dayton. It's certainly my first time here physically, but I'd like to say that for those of us that have lived in the Western Balkans, it's been a city with so much significance for more than 3 decades. So it's a great pleasure to be here, and I definitely agree with you about the hospitality part, an important feature of this city, and I'd add of the entire United States. When it comes to NATO, I don't want to oversimplify it, but for us in Kosovo, given our history and given the historic role that NATO played in saving our lives, in helping us get our freedom, and in preserving and keeping peace, something that we had never known in our lives and in the history of our region before, to be in NATO means to be safe. It's about being safe. And whether in life or whether as a person or as a country, safety is a precondition to enjoying your other rights. Safety is a precondition to prosperity. It's a precondition to economic development, to foreign direct investment. It's practically a precondition to everything. When you don't have peace, you can't really open your country to opportunities and you can't thrive. And when you do have peace, then you can open doors for new opportunities for your people and offer the prosperity that they deserve. So NATO has been such a significant part of our lives over the past 3 decades or so. And in the case of Kosovo, I would say even more so than in Bosnia-Herzegovina, because in the Republic of Kosovo back in 1999, when myself and the members of my delegation were just young kids, NATO came to our rescue and saved our lives. And there's nothing more noble than that. We would have never been here if it wasn't for that. Unfortunately, there was a lot of bloodshed caused by the Milosevic regime, hundreds of thousands of civilian lives lost, thousands and thousands of women raped, which was used as a tool of war, thousands and thousands of children killed. And even today, in the case of Kosovo 25 years after the war, in the case of Bosnia 30 years after the war, there are still so many missing persons from the war who were forcibly disappeared. So the wounds are still very, very deep. But when you talk to the victims, especially to the families of the victims, to the mothers of those children killed, you will never find anyone that wants revenge. They want to preserve peace. They want justice. They want reconciliation. But of course, justice is a precondition to long-standing peace, long-lasting peace, as well as reconciliation. So NATO has played a vital role in offering a region, which is the Western Balkans, something that we had never known before: peace, living in peace, not living in war, which is why our kids today are the very first generation in the history of that region. And I'm talking about a history of thousands of years. I'm not just talking about recent histories. Our kids are the very first ones that have never known war and are actually living in peace. And that's thanks to NATO, and that's thanks primarily to the United States of America.
You remind us that the history, even after the Dayton Accords, was very complicated and tragic in the region. And as you've alluded to, of course, Kosovo went through a lot, given the aggression of Serbia, and we continue to have challenges with Serbia to this day, which we'll talk about. Also note that in that 72-day Kosovo campaign that NATO carried out, the Prime Minister of the UK was a really key actor in encouraging and engaging the United States. But before we get to all of that, say a little bit more about how Kosovo persisted and was resilient in the midst of the aggression that it had to deal with, and how that ethos of wanting peace and putting revenge aside has been developed and preserved.
Well, I would agree with you that what happened after Dayton, what happened in our region, especially in Kosovo, was tragic. But I don't think it was complicated. It was actually very simple, and we need to all be very careful that we don't fall into the trap of both-sidism. You will hear quite often perhaps people saying, oh, everyone in that region simply killed each other. That is not true. This is just like saying, well, Ukrainians and Russians and Estonians and Latvians and everyone in that region just kill each other. No, there was a clear aggressor. Milosevic was the one who went after everyone else and killed them. The Milosevic regime came to Kosovo, they came to our home, they kicked us out of our homes, they killed innocent people, they raped women, and they destroyed everything down to the ashes. So there was a clear aggressor and a clear victim, and history has noted that also through International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia cases, as well as the International Court of Justice cases when it comes to Bosnia-Herzegovina. Now, Kosovo today is a country of survivors who thrive. It's a country where democracy is flourishing, a country where human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, no matter their ethnicity, are the most important pillar of our governance, and a country that moves forward in a very clear strategic objective, which is Euro-Atlantic integration. We've never flirted with our other forces, malign forces that is. We know for sure where we're going, and no matter the thorns or the rocks in our path forward, we never look elsewhere. We work very, very hard in our reforms. We're already spending more than 2% of our GDP in our defense. And in terms of security and rule of law reforms, Kosovo is in the top 2 in the world in terms of those reforms that are making our country safer and more secure. So we understand what it is and how it is to live in the opposite of peace. We've known the opposite of democracy. It's destruction, it's human suffering, which is why we do everything in our power to preserve it and to continuously nurture it, because we never take it for granted. We know that, as someone much smarter than me said once, democracy is only one generation away from extinction. We need to make sure that we're not that generation that allows it to go extinct, but quite the opposite, that nurtures it constantly so that it grows stronger, and that peace is something that becomes stronger by the day and not more fragile by the day. So in Kosovo, despite being a small country, we strongly believe that we can give an important contribution to that, because these are values that we need to defend collectively, and no one can do it alone.
Thank you. We'll come back to democracy. I appreciate the answer. Ambassador, let me bring you into the conversation. In your long history of being a diplomat, you've engaged with the Balkans at different periods of time, and I wonder if you might reflect a little bit on what you see as similar in terms of the dynamic now to when you first started working on the issue, and what's different now.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for bringing us all together. I did want to start, if I may, by paying particular tribute, not just to Dick Holbrooke, who sadly is no longer with us, but also to another great American diplomat whose memorial service I went to on my way here. And in fact, it was Frank Wisner who, of course, helped Marty Ahtisaari construct the Kosovo Agreement, which led to Kosovo becoming independent. And Frank Wisner was primarily a Middle East specialist, but because of his talents, he was brought out of retirement by the US State Department. So I did want to pay that tribute, because I think it's very important that those titans of American diplomacy have their true recognition. I was a junior diplomat when the Kosovo conflict started, and I think what you said, Madam President, about Milosevic is absolutely right. This was a man who was driven not to preserve Tito's Yugoslavia. And I want to stress that, because I know that sometimes some Serbs feel that we're anti-Serb, that all of this is an anti-Serb movement. It absolutely isn't, as the President said. This is about tolerant societies, multi-ethnic societies, living alongside each other, peacefully, with prosperity, with security, which I agree is preeminent for prosperity. And the people who were responsible for the massacres in Kosovo and the expelling of 1 million refugees. People forget that number. NATO built the camps in Macedonia, what we then called Macedonia, North Macedonia, for those people. And then they went back to their homes. So as an example of intervention done well, I think it does have lots of good lessons for the international community. And I did want to put that on the table, because I think that side of it often gets forgotten. And Dayton, of course, stopped a war. When the Dayton Peace Agreement was passed, I was a young diplomat in the embassy in Washington, and we were watching, obviously, with enormous excitement. And the achievement of that, I mean, Bosnia, the issue of Bosnia at the time was like Ukraine now. It was the dominant issue in European security. And it was the first time European security had been under that much threat since 1945. So the enormity of what Dayton brought along is huge. But I think we all know, and we talked about this in the first panels on Friday, moving things forward with the Dayton structures is proving to be very difficult. Now, sometimes it's difficult because of one person, in particular in Republika Srpska, and sometimes it's difficult because of the structures. And we have to collectively find a way through this, because something like 80%, so an overwhelming majority of Bosnia and Herzegovina's citizens want to join the European Union. I think that's new from when I first worked on Bosnia. The desire to join NATO, to make a contribution in NATO, has been there a very long time, as you might expect. But I think it's only relatively recently that EU accession has come into play. And the majority of Bosnia and Herzegovina's citizens really want to have the reforms to their country that would enable them to join the European Union. We, the Brits, have left the European Union, but as that is the aspiration of the Bosnian people, that is what we want to help them do. And we will chair this year a German initiative called the Berlin Process, which works on intra-regional cooperation. Kosovo is a full member, which is fantastic, and a full member alongside all the other members of the Western Balkans. And we aim to try and find public policy areas, as well as the big picture stuff, where the countries can cooperate together and hence make progress towards EU
And
integration.
what I'm about to say might sound like a commercial for the UK, but I don't mean it to. But I will say, since the UK left the EU, I've sensed in the UK government an effort to stay engaged in the process of building diplomatic relationships, inter-regional cooperation, and peace. And I think that is something to be celebrated.
Can I just add to that then? For this Labour government, leaning in strongly into the issues in the Western Balkans is a priority. Obviously, they're focused on Ukraine, but they take enormous interest in Kosovo, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the region, and this is why we wanted to host the Berlin process.
The question I have next for the two of you builds on your answer, Ambassador. The leaders I have most appreciated working with over the years are people who have, I think, qualities that the two of you have, which is they look ahead with an idealism that is powerful, but they also are grounded in the reality of the difficulties of the moment. So I want you to sketch out a future for Kosovo and for the region that you believe is attainable in the next 5 years or so, and what that future is that you would like to see, what you think it will take to get there, and what the impediments are that we have to overcome. Let's start with you, Madam President.
Thank you, and perhaps I can start by quoting, again, Ambassador Frank Wisner, which I join you in commemorating, as well as Ambassador Holbrooke, both of whom have had, I would say, a historic impact in our region and peace in our region. And Frank Wisner, when he was talking about Marty Ahtisaari, after President Ahtisaari died, he said, this was a man that was clear in his objectives, but flexible in his tactics. And I think that was a way to explain something that is so needed in our region. It's very important that we don't move from our clear objectives and our goals, but at the same time, pragmatism requires you from time to time to use flexible tactics to achieve those goals. So yes, what we're facing today is still the fragility of peace, the fragility of our hard-won freedoms, and for that, and the path towards the European Union is very, very complex. Oftentimes, you meet a lot of bureaucrats who can't wait to find justifications. justification after justification to kind of drag this process of moving towards the European Union. And that causes a lot of frustration in the region. If you look at other countries, I'm not going to take the example of Kosovo here, but if you look at other countries in our region, for example, it took North Macedonia about 18 years to move just from one step to another, which tells you about how the faith in that system might go down. I'm talking about the people, and you need the people behind in order to move forward in a certain path. In Kosovo, that's not a problem yet. 97% of the people of Kosovo trust our Euro-Atlantic integration. They trust the US, they trust the UK, obviously, they trust the European Union, and they trust NATO. However, this trust needs to now be translated into concrete steps forward. So in the next 5 years, what I think is doable, one, getting a candidate status and opening chapters for European Union integration for Kosovo is absolutely doable. And this is not just a dream that is not based on anything. Yes, there are 5 countries that have not recognized Kosovo's independence within the EU so far. However, these countries had voted in favor of a formula back in 2015 when we adopted our stabilization and association agreement with the European Union. They had voted in favor by simply adding an article which says this does not prejudice the individual member states' position on Kosovo's independence. And with that, they were fine. So we're proposing that something similar be added to a candidate status decision for Kosovo, where the Council of the EU would mandate the Commission to work with us towards that process. So this is absolutely doable. It's something that has been done before. All it takes is political will and leadership from some of the countries of the European Union to push this forward. That's one. Secondly, Partnership for Peace for Kosovo. As a fundamental first step towards membership to NATO, is something that, again, is doable based on the same formula, because Partnership for Peace does not require ratification in the member states of NATO. So again, an invitation letter from the North Atlantic Council, which adds that article to make Spain and a few others feel okay on terms of their bilateral relations with Kosovo, but yet views Kosovo in PFP, and then as a step towards full membership, as a strategic objective, because the more NATO territory in the Western Balkans, the more peace, the more stability. And peace and stability in the Western Balkans is crucial for the peace and stability of the entire European continent. So if someone is strategically thinking about making Europe safer, and I'm sure NATO is thinking about that, obviously, then bringing in Kosovo and Bosnia-Herzegovina into NATO steadily, but with a more rapid path than what we've seen before, which was practically nothing, is crucial. Yes, we do have NATO forces in Kosovo that are playing a crucial role in maintaining peace and security in the entire region. However, membership into NATO would open a new chapter of safety, stability, and peace, which is long-term, which is sustainable. And that's when it comes to Euro-Atlantic integration. And then, of course, in terms of internal development, I see stronger institutions, I see more good governance, I see a stronger economy, although we've had the highest GDP growth in the region in the past 4 years with an average of 6% per year. I see more US investment in Kosovo, and I see a larger international collaboration both with the United Kingdom as well as other European countries. And as president, I'm also engaging in something that we haven't seen happen a lot before, also engaging in more collaboration with countries of other continents, whether we're talking about Latin America or some of our partners in Asia, as well as some of our partners in Africa. I'm talking about partners that believe in the same values of democracy, human rights, and freedom, and with whom we can work, whether on economic cooperation or just, strengthening these values together. Because I think that geography and distance should not determine our partnerships. Quite the opposite. It's the values that we believe in that should determine it.
You mentioned the importance of being clear on objectives, but flexible on tools. I was just going to point out that's much better than the alternative. And there are some times when you look around at leaders and you think, okay, they're very stubborn about their tactics, but very flexible about their objectives, and not always a good thing.
I don't agree with that kind of action. Yeah.
Ambassador, your thoughts about the next 5 years?
I think there's a window at the moment, partly because of the changed geostrategic context in Europe, because of Ukraine, with Moldova also being very vulnerable. I know that the countries of the region have not always believed that the EU really would have another wave of enlargement, but the EU has made it clear that it will, and therefore there's a window, and we would strongly urge all the governments of the countries in the region to seize this opportunity, as Kosovo is doing, as the President so eloquently described. And just looking at the state of where negotiations are, they're very technical things, accession negotiations with the EU, but you have countries like North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania in the van, at the front. They've made more progress than some of the others. So I think in 5 years, it's absolutely thinkable that all of those three would be in the European Union, with the others, we would hope, very closely behind. Those three countries I mentioned are already in NATO. They're making a very valuable contribution, including on Ukraine. We work very closely with them bilaterally. We do a lot of training together. And I would hope that in similar fashion, in 5 years, the remaining countries, if they want to get closer to NATO, and I understand obviously why there may be some ambivalence about that in Serbia, but if they want to get closer to NATO, then I absolutely agree with the President. That would be an immeasurable